Hi everybody. Australia abounds with positive, uplifting news on a daily basis. You just wouldn't know it judging from the content of our newspapers or many of the television news bulletins, which are overwhelmingly negative and unnecessarily so at the moment. So I'm doing regular broadcasts to provide a bit of balance by bringing you some of the positive stories that are being either ignored or underplayed by mainstream media. Now, one of the most encouraging aspects at the moment is that our political leaders and their medical advisors are starting to have a conversation about easing the social restrictions and allowing at least some businesses and the employees to go back to work. Reports suggest that the path to unlock social restrictions will focus on wider COVID-19 testing, improved tracing measures, and better surveillance of potential outbreaks as governments work with employers and unions to prepare for a partial return of workers through roster rotations. The National COVID-19 Coordination Commission is working to assess the ability of some sectors to implement workplace responses incorporating social distancing rules. Workers in the construction, infrastructure, office-based and manufacturing sectors are considered the most likely to benefit from the next COVID-19 phase aimed at unlocking parts of the economy. Now, in the real estate sector, surveys suggest that there are plenty of buyers out there, and who believe that now is a good time to buy a home because record low interest rates and declining competition at auctions and other forms of purchase provide a window of opportunity for buyers, including first home buyers. Consumer data from Finder shows that 42% of Australians think that now is a good time to buy property. The data, which surveyed almost 1,000 respondents, found that while overall optimism towards the property market was lower than prior to the virus, many buyers felt that now was a time to snag a bargain. Now, I believe that this is a particularly good time for first home buyers to take action. The federal government scheme, which started on the 1st of January, allows them to get a loan with just a 5% deposit. Interest rates will probably never be lower than they are now, and there are much fewer buyers in the market. And that means less competition from other buyers, and that presents a possibility for buyers of negotiating a good price. And a new survey suggests that young buyers remain keen to get into the market. A new report from PRD Chief Economist Dr. Diaswati Mardiasmo says their research shows that most Australians aged from 18 to 34 have property ownerships very much in their sights. More than 3/4 of respondents to their survey aspired to home ownership and considered it was either extremely important or very important. And Diaswati said most of the people surveyed favoured buying in the $400,000 to $600,000 price range, which is a reasonable possibility in most of our capital cities, not so much in Sydney. The Treasury analysis of the government's JobKeeper program suggests unemployment will peak at 10%, 5 percentage points lower than would have been the case without the $130 billion scheme. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg says the government's wage subsidy program will support millions of Australian jobs as we build the bridge to the other side following the severe economic impact from the coronavirus. There have now been more than 800,000 applications from businesses for the wage subsidy payment, which will be $1,500 per fortnight per employee. Personally, I think that if Australia gets through this crisis with the jobless rate going no higher than 10%, we will have done pretty well. And I will remind you of this. Back in the 1980s, the early 1980s, the last time Australia had a recession, unemployment hovered around 10% for quite a long time. And during that period, real estate prices actually rose. In the 3 years to 1993, values rose to some degree at least in every one of the 8 capital cities, notwithstanding 10% unemployment. Now, Commonwealth Bank Chief Executive Matt Comyn says that there are early signs of a slowdown in the number of mortgage customers seeking to have their payments delayed after initially being swamped with requests for assistance. And in 3.5 weeks since banks said stricken customers could defer their loan repayments for up to 6 months to cope with the crisis, more than 70,000 of CBA's 1.8 million home loan borrowers have requested such a delay. But Comyn says the growth in the numbers of new applications for assistance is slowing. He says, while we continue to receive ongoing and significant demand for this, we are beginning to see initial signs of a levelling out of requests to help after the initial spike in the past few weeks. This suggests that the different measures put in place by the federal and state governments and by the banking industry as a whole are helping to flatten the curve of demand for such assistance. And the National Australia Bank has this week reported similar trends with their inquiries. Now, home owners who are worried that the value of their properties will drop considerably during this virus crisis period can take heart that the reality is likely to be much less painful. There have been isolated reports warning of house price falls of up to 30%, but most economists and real estate specialists and analysts say Australia's strong financial system is supporting property owners and should prevent any heavy losses. Home values increased in every capital city in the March quarter, according to CoreLogic data, despite COVID-19 hitting hard towards the end of that 3-month period. And the latest figures from SQM Research published this week show that halfway through April, there is still little sign of downturn in property values in the major cities. Now, CoreLogic's head of research, Tim Lawless, says that while home buying and selling will effectively stall for a few months, prices are likely to be more insulated. Lawless says unemployment and the economy will take a hit, but the 6 months repayment holidays offered by lenders will give owners and investors some breathing space. And he says that should stymie the flow of distressed property on the market. It's worth noting that the only big name commentator who is actually predicting major declines in property values is Shane Oliver, an economist at AMP Capital, who has an absolutely dismal track record when it comes to predicting prices in the Australian property market. Oliver has been predicting big drops in home values regularly for the past 15 years, and to date he's been wrong every single time. Now, some good news in Victoria. The state government has backtracked on a tough social distancing rule that it introduced only last week, which would have prevented open inspections of any homes that were occupied, a requirement that would have all but shut down the struggling residential market in Melbourne. The Consumer Affairs Minister this week reversed those regulations the government had justified as recently as last Friday, following outrage from vendors and the real estate industry. So, individual inspections of properties for sale can still go ahead in Victoria. Various state governments have announced a temporary reduction in land tax for commercial properties as they prepare to legislate the federal government's Commercial Tenancy Code of Conduct, which was announced last week. Both Queensland and New South Wales will both provide up to 25% discount on land tax this year as part of packages worth $400 million in Queensland and $440 million in New South Wales, on the proviso that the savings are passed on to tenants in the form of rent reductions. And there are similar measures afoot for investors who own residential properties. Now, in New South Wales, the state government is seeking to generate economic activity and jobs by encouraging development. Developer contributions and levies are going to be reviewed as the Berejiklian government steps up attempts to boost Sydney's housing supply and local infrastructure. The government's appointed the New South Wales Productivity Commissioner to spearhead the review of infrastructure contributions and make recommendations for a new system. In South Australia, the local government minister, Stephen Knoll, will be able to fast-track big developments important to stimulating the economy if the local councils delay their approvals. And this is under new planning powers that the state government has given itself. Councils will have development assessment taken away from them if they drag their heels on big projects under the new powers given to the local government minister, and will allow major projects important to stimulating that state's economy to be fast-tracked and prevent a downturn in construction work. Over in Victoria, the State Premier Daniel Andrews says that construction there will be the key to helping Victoria recover from the economic shock of the coronavirus pandemic. The Premier says big construction jobs are more important than ever. And he says, we have the biggest construction program in the state's history, and it will need to get bigger once this crisis is over as we push out of what is a really significant shock to our economy. In Queensland, 800 jobs are currently up for grabs in the state's resources and energy sector, particularly in the central Queensland region near Mackay. The Queensland Resources Council has compiled the industry's latest jobs data on the employment website Seek for April, and most of those 800 jobs are new ones which have been posted in the past fortnight and in the Mackay district There are 305 vacant positions advertised in the mining, resources or energy sectors, the most of any Queensland region. Now, developer Villaworld is backing buyer confidence in the face of the pandemic as it launches a major new housing project in Melbourne's north. Villawood will begin selling the first of 2,500 lots in its Redstone estate in Sunbury on the city's northern outskirts this week. The lots will be transacted online only, in keeping with social distancing restrictions. One of the largest developers of land in Brisbane's north has bought land at Narangba with plans for a 170-lot residential estate. Trask Land Corporation has snapped up a vacant 11-hectare parcel of land at Narangba, paying $8.7 million in a cash unconditional deal. Now, the buoyant residential market in the Moreton Bay region, which is in the northern suburbs of Brisbane, is a major focus for a developer and seen as pretty good value for buyers due to its proximity to the Sunshine Coast, amongst other attractive features, and it's certainly a market that features regularly in the reports that we publish at Hotspotting. Up in Darwin, the virus crisis, so they say, won't hold up construction of the new Charles Darwin University City campus development, with which project partners are continuing to work on during the pandemic. It's a $430 million project, and it will increase the university's international cohort by 5,000 students, expected to be completed by the year 2024. With the growing coronavirus pandemic said to have no impact on the project's timelines. Okay, up in North Queensland, there's plenty of action happening in Townsville, which is a property market that we like a lot and think has a big future. Plans for a 116-room hotel and childcare centre to be built near Townsville Airport have been lodged this week with Townsville City Council. Meanwhile, the council itself is pushing ahead with $70 million worth of projects in the region right now. It's fast-tracking a range of small to medium-sized projects to create economic activity and jobs. Now, Townsville is tipped to be one of the cities to recover the fastest after the defeat of the COVID-19 pandemic. DS Economics economist Colin Dwyer believes the city's broad economy has been less impacted by the pandemic and will recover more quickly than other economies that are more reliant on tourism. He says Townsville's pipeline of construction and infrastructure projects will hold that region in good stead, and I totally agree with him. One of my views about the virus crisis is that many regional areas will be much less impacted than some of the biggest cities. Those that have diverse economies, not primarily reliant on tourism, will hold up well, and those that have economies based on agriculture and viticulture will do particularly well. Now, Townsville, in its economy, has big components of government departments. It's got a big military economy. It's got strong ties to the resources sector with some big projects now underway with headquarters in Townsville, and also has important medical and education sectors. So I think Townsville will hold up well. Now, I'd like to finish with reference to how media, or some sections of media, are reporting important events in a way that's unreasonable, unnecessarily negative, and in some cases blatantly dishonest. One of the absolute worst offenders is the Australian Financial Review, which used to be a serious, quality, national newspaper for people interested in business and finance. But these days, it's the worst kind of tabloid rag. Now, this week it ran a headline which screamed, IMF predicts deep recession, the IMF being the International Monetary Fund. Now, what the IMF actually said was that it expected the world generally to experience a short, sharp recession and then a strong recovery. Now, amongst the really important things that the IMF said was that governments and central banks around the world are providing unprecedented support to households, firms, and financial markets. And the IMF's chief economist, Geeta Gopinath, said, assuming the pandemic fades in the second half of 2020 and that policy actions taken around the world are effective in preventing widespread bankruptcies, extended job losses, and system-wide financial strains, we project global growth in 2021, that's next year, to rebound to 5.8%. So the IMF is actually predicting a very strong year in the global economy next year. And the Financial Review article actually included this important and positive information. But where was it? It was actually in paragraphs 43, 44 and 45 of a 45-part article. In other words, right down the bottom when no one would have seen it. Also, and very crucially for the Australian economy, that article said Australia's largest trading partner, China, will have modestly positive growth in its economy of 1.2% this year before rebounding to 9.2% growth next year, the IMF predicts. So let's be clear here. The IMF expects China, our most important trading partner, to actually deliver economic growth this year and to have a significant boom next year. But the Financial Review buried this important information down the bottom of a 45-paragraph article which carried the headline, IMF predicts deep recession. The headline was quite simply a blatant lie. And that's what we're up against. So that's it for now. I do plan to keep showing up most days to try and provide some balance by presenting some of the good and positive news that's out there every day. Bye for now.